Well, if there were chariots found in the Red Sea, it would probably have something to do with the crossing of the sea.
And if this is the site of the crossing, we would expect to find physical remains of the Egyptian army on the seabed.
What if I told you that in 2025, divers uncovered what might be Pharaoh's entire army lying beneath the Red Sea, perfectly preserved for thousands of years, but the story barely made a ripple in mainstream news? It's the kind of discovery that should shake Egyptology to its core.
This text contains clear clues concerning the route of Exodus, which has led us to this location at the Red Sea.
Yet, the silence is deafening. Have you seen a headline about this? Most haven't, and that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. To make sense of what's down there, we first need to go back to where the trail begins, with a man named Ron Wyatt, the man who started it all. To understand the 2025 Red Sea claims, we need to trace the story back to its source. Ron Wyatt, the man who spent decades chasing a submerged army that could rewrite biblical history. Born in 1933 in Tennessee, Wyatt started his career as a nurse, but his real obsession was archaeology. Well, the kind of archaeology that doesn't require a degree. He was a self-taught researcher, fueled by faith and a literal reading of the Bible. Some called him eccentric, others relentless. The point is, Wyatt came into this with a very clear idea of what he expected to find. That context matters because it shaped every claim he made, every dive he took, and every photo he snapped beneath the waves. Wyatt's claims are dramatic, almost cinematic. He said he discovered Egyptian chariot wheels at Nuweiba Beach, sitting on the seafloor where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aqaba. Around them, he reported human and horse bones preserved in coral formations, lying as if frozen in the final moments of a catastrophic crossing. He claimed the artifacts rested over 200 feet underwater, and for decades, he documented everything meticulously with photographs, sketches, and journals. From 1978 to 1999, Wyatt conducted multiple expeditions, most notably during the 1980s, recording hundreds of images and notes that he circulated through self-published reports, tapes, and videos. Yet none of it appeared in peer-reviewed journals, and none of his findings were formally examined by established archaeological institutions. And here's where the story becomes genuinely puzzling. If Wyatt truly had found the physical evidence of Pharaoh's army, bones, chariot wheels, possibly the remains of a historical exodus, what would you expect him to do next? Most professional archaeologists would rush to contact universities, submit the findings for radiocarbon dating, invite independent experts, and ensure the artifacts were preserved and catalogued in a museum. Wyatt did none of that. No chariot wheels were sent for verification, no bones entered academic records, and the radiocarbon tests he claimed were done were never independently confirmed. Instead, everything remained in his private archives, accessible only to those willing to seek them out. That doesn't necessarily make Wyatt dishonest. On the contrary, he seems to have genuinely believed in the importance of his work. But in archaeology, belief doesn't count for much. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and in this case, the evidence existed almost entirely in personal documentation rather than independently verified research. Without that institutional validation, his findings live in a kind of limbo, intriguing, tantalizing, but unproven. Wyatt's story also raises a question for all of us. What would you do if you stumbled onto something that could change history? Would you trust yourself to handle it alone, or would you hand it to experts? Wyatt chose to go solo, spending decades refining his dives and his documentation, convinced that he was on the right track. That decision, for better or worse, shaped every narrative that followed, influencing explorers, documentaries, and now modern claims about the 2025 discoveries in the Red Sea. And that's where things start to get messy, because once other researchers with real credentials began examining Wyatt's claims, the story started to fracture. Chariot wheels appeared in some photos, but not in others. Bones were cited, but never produced for inspection. Coral formations were difficult to date, And the silence from the academic world was deafening. Questions began to emerge, questions that don't entirely fit the story Wyatt told, and questions that force us to consider whether we are looking at a genuine find, a passionate amateur's overreach, or something in between. So, if Wyatt's decades of work weren't enough to convince the archaeological establishment, what did the 2025 expeditions really find? And why are some of these discoveries quietly circulating online, while mainstream Egyptology barely acknowledges them? The Inconsistencies. What if I told you that some of Wyatt's claims violate basic physics and diving safety protocols? That's exactly what investigators discovered when they actually examined the story. And once you start peeling back the layers, the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Wyatt claimed he found chariot wheels and human and horse remains at depths of over 200 feet in the Red Sea. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the catch. Recreational scuba diving has strict physics-based limits. Most recreational divers top out around 125 to 130 feet. Go deeper than that without special training, and nitrogen narcosis can hit you like a sledgehammer. Oxygen toxicity skyrockets, and decompression obligations become extreme. Now, the equipment Wyatt documented using was standard recreational scuba gear. To safely dive 200-plus feet, he would have needed full technical diving gear, special gas mixtures like nitrox or trimix, and months of rigorous certification. In 1978, a setup like that would have cost between $5,000 and $15,000, equivalent to way more in today's money, and there's no record of him ever pursuing that kind of training. So, either Wyatt exaggerated the depth, was risking his life on undocumented technical dives, or somehow discovered a method more sophisticated than anything he claimed. The Standish brothers documented this in 2011, showing that physics and scuba science don't exactly back up his timeline. This doesn't automatically mean he didn't see something underwater. It just means his story about how he did it doesn't line up with reality. Now, let's talk about the most glaring inconsistency. If someone really recovered Egyptian chariot wheels, human remains, and horses from the Red Sea, the greatest archaeological find in history, where would you expect those items to end up? Museums, universities, and peer-reviewed journals. Anywhere that can preserve, study, and authenticate them. But here's what the record shows. 0 chariot wheels documented in any world museum, 0 human bones, and 0 horse remains with verifiable provenance. There's not a single photograph of a golden chariot wheel that has been authenticated. No radiocarbon dating results published. Nothing. So, what happened? Either the objects were misidentified natural formations, Wyatt had something but never verified it, or some sort of conspiracy blocked academic validation. And, for the record, there's no evidence supporting that last theory. The simplest explanation is often the best. What Wyatt saw might not have been a chariot wheel at all. And here's where marine biology steps in. Red Sea corals, particularly the genus Acropora, grow in circular, wheel-like shapes to maximize sunlight for their algae. Morphologically, these coral discs can look exactly like wheels from a distance. Peer-reviewed studies comparing Wyatt's photos to natural coral formations show striking similarities, with growth patterns matching biology, not human engineering. This isn't about dishonesty, it's pareidolia, our brain's tendency to see patterns where none exist. Rocks look like faces, clouds form shapes, and apparently, coral can look like Pharaoh's chariot wheels. It's a classic trap for an amateur archaeologist diving into unfamiliar environments without formal training. So, Wyatt might have been convinced he'd found something extraordinary, and maybe he did see interesting underwater structures. But physics, diving safety, and marine biology all suggest that what he reported is inconsistent with what actually exists. And that's where the story gets really intriguing. Because in 2024, we're being told that a multi-million-dollar expedition supposedly verified everything Wyatt claimed. Did they actually find Pharaoh's army? Or are we looking at a modern repeat of the same misidentifications? The 2024 expedition: myth, money, or reality? Fast forward to 2024. Suddenly, the story that had been stuck in the 1970s hits a whole new level. A massive $10 million expedition supposedly set out to finally prove Wyatt right. Military-grade sonar, deep-sea submersibles, satellite imaging, and even cutting-edge underwater drones. The media called it a groundbreaking confirmation of Pharaoh's army resting beneath the Red Sea. It sounds like something out of a blockbuster film, but is it real? First, let's break down the logistics. Funding an underwater project of this magnitude is not like buying a GoPro and hopping in a kayak. $10 million buys serious tech. Remotely operated vehicles that can dive thousands of feet, sonar capable of scanning the seabed with centimeter accuracy, and diving crews trained for extreme depths. Yet, even with all that, there's a gap between what you can detect and what you can confirm as ancient artifacts. The expedition claimed to have verified chariot wheels, human bones, and horses. But here's the first red flag. None of these items has surfaced in peer-reviewed journals. None. Professional archaeology demands documentation, exact GPS coordinates, physical samples cataloged and preserved, and chemical analysis proving age and origin. And yet, all we have are press releases, flashy video clips, and a few vague photos that could easily be misinterpreted. Then there's the sonar data. According to experts, sonar images of the Red Sea floor are notoriously tricky. The region is rich in coral reefs, volcanic rock, and sediment layers that shift with currents. Sonar reflections from these features can mimic straight lines, wheel-like discs, and even what looks like skeletal shapes. In fact, marine biologists and underwater geologists warn that it's almost inevitable that amateurs, or even professionals without context, will see artifacts in natural formations. Even the diving aspect raises questions. Reports from the 2024 expedition suggest dives were conducted at depths of 180 to 220 feet, matching Wyatt's original claims. But technical diving at those depths is not just expensive, it's dangerous. Divers need months of certification, strict gas protocols, and careful decompression planning. Any shortcuts, and you risk nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, or death. Yet, the expedition footage shows recreational-style dives with minimal safety commentary. In other words, the story reads more like an adventure documentary than a scientific operation. Then there's the matter of verification. Archaeology is a discipline built on scrutiny. If these chariot wheels and bones exist, every major university and museum would want access. The artifacts would be radiocarbon dated, material analyzed and compared with Egyptian records. But in over a decade since Wyatt first claimed them, nothing has gone through that process. And the 2024 expedition? Still nothing beyond sensational headlines. So, what are we actually looking at here? Let's run through the possibilities. 1. The expedition really did find something, but misidentified natural formations as ancient chariots and human remains. 2. Some objects were recovered, but their authenticity couldn't be verified, so the team kept it quiet, or spun the story for maximum media impact. And 3, less likely, but it keeps the narrative alive, there's a conspiracy keeping the data from the public. But here's the key. No evidence supports that last one, while physics, marine biology, and the history of underwater misidentifications support the first. History is full of examples. Remember the Atlantis sonar blip stories from the 1990s? Sonar picked up unusual formations, headlines exploded, but subsequent analysis showed it was volcanic rock and shifting sand dunes. And Red Sea coral reefs are famous for creating shapes that look eerily man-made. Combine that with our natural urge to see patterns, and it's easy to understand why this myth keeps resurfacing. Even the $10 million budget doesn't guarantee proof. In archaeology, money buys access, technology, and expertise, but it can't make an ambiguous sonar image a confirmed chariot wheel. It can't turn coral into gold, or sediment into human bone. Without independent verification, peer-reviewed publication, or proper artifact preservation, claims remain claims. So, where does that leave us? The 2024 expedition is undeniably impressive in scale. The story of Wyatt, the Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea, and the multi-million-dollar confirmation attempt is captivating. But the evidence, the actual evidence, remains missing. What we're left with is a tension between spectacle and science, between legend and an verifiable fact. And here's the kicker: the Red Sea story isn't over. For every claim made, for every sonar image released, there are new questions. Could technology one day definitively solve this? Will professional archaeologists get involved with full transparency? Or is this just the modern retelling of a decades-old mystery that thrives on mystery itself? Real underwater archaeology. What verified discoveries actually look like. While everyone online is busy arguing about chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea, real underwater archaeologists in Egypt are pulling up finds so spectacular, so heavily documented, and so rigorously verified that they set the gold standard for what a genuine discovery looks like. And once you see the difference, the gap between dramatic YouTube claims and actual science becomes impossible to ignore. This chapter is your template. After this point, you won't just watch a viral Pharaoh's army found underwater video the same way again. You'll know exactly what to look for. Earlier, we talked about sonar illusions and unverifiable expeditions that drop million-dollar numbers but zero evidence. But right now, real archaeologists are diving into Egypt's waters and uncovering discoveries that explode across the academic world in days, not decades. And the best example to start with is the military ship found at Thonis Herakleion. In 2021, researchers from the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology were exploring the sunken city of Thonis Herakleion when they found an 82-foot Egyptian military vessel lying 8.5 meters beneath the surface. The ship had been crushed during the collapse of the Temple of Amun around 140 BCE, which is the kind of precise historical context that only real archaeology can deliver. This wasn't a blurry picture or a diver pointing at a coral shape that kind of looks like a wheel. This was a wooden hull. Actual preserved planks, cargo pieces, and structural fragments were all recorded, photographed, and measured by specialists. And the verification moved fast. Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced it immediately. Reuters published the details. Smithsonian Magazine broke down the ship's engineering. Experts dated the vessel, traced its cultural connections, and documented its physical remains with scientific clarity. This is how quickly real discoveries get recognized. When something genuine is found, the world doesn't sit around whispering about it in dark corners of the internet. Institutions step forward, put their names on the line, and share the evidence. Compare that to the alleged chariot wheels. We're 50 years in, and still zero institutions have verified a thing. If that ship wasn't enough, things moved up another level in 2025.
Well, I didn't make that many dives. I made the first 12 that were ever made on the Titanic.
When Robert Ballard, the world-famous explorer who found the Titanic, led a major expedition off the coast of Alexandria. What his team uncovered hit the global media circuit almost immediately. They revealed the remains of Cleopatra's ancient port, complete with limestone structures, amphoras, stone columns, and anchors lying in shallow Mediterranean water. Ballard's team brought in specialists from multiple countries documented the site with high-resolution imaging, and carefully cataloged every artifact with the same precision he used on the Titanic. The Egyptian government announced it. National Geographic announced it. Smithsonian wrote about it. Newsweek published a detailed feature explaining the historical significance. The artifacts are already being prepared for a museum exhibition, and Ballard himself spoke openly about the discovery because that's what real scientists do. They don't hide data behind dramatic sound effects and shadowy claims. They show their work. And honestly, think about it for a moment. If Robert Ballard found Pharaoh's army lying at the bottom of the Red Sea, would the world be hearing about it from a YouTube thumbnail first? Or would Ballard be standing in front of the world's cameras holding a press conference? The silence from his team says more than any viral video ever could. But the biggest breakthrough for our investigation comes from the Red Sea itself. In July 2025, an international team led by Jerome Dobson published research on a submerged ancient port in Foul Bay, right in the same region where Pharaoh's army claims are often placed. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a leak. It was a peer-reviewed study published in Comptes Abirendus Geoscience, complete with named researchers, documented methods, and precise dating. The port turned out to be between 21 and 30,000 years old, placing it deep within the last glacial maximum. And again, the evidence was clear. The team laid out their methodology, provided geological analysis, published their findings openly, and backed their claims with institutional credibility. Notice the pattern forming here. When real underwater archaeology happens, you see official government statements, major news coverage, academic publications, full photographic documentation, named experts, and museum involvement. These elements appear every single time there is a verified discovery in Egyptian waters. Yet none of these elements appear in the Pharaoh's army story. Not one. And now you have the checklist. If someone claims something extraordinary, ask yourself whether the evidence follows this pattern. If it doesn't, then the claim is probably weaker than it sounds. Which brings us to the real question, the one that changes everything. If Egypt's waters are delivering verified discoveries every single year, backed by governments, institutions, and world-leading experts, then why would the greatest archaeological find in human history remain hidden, unverified, and unclaimed? The veracity gap. What the silence actually means. This is where the story gets philosophical, and this is where our research finally diverges from every other YouTube video that has talked about this subject. Everyone else keeps arguing about chariot wheels, coral formations, and grainy underwater photos. But after going through the archaeology reports, the institutional behavior patterns, and even comparing how Egypt announces other discoveries like Cleopatra's underwater port, we found the one insight no competitor has emphasized. The silence itself is the story. And when you understand why the silence exists, the entire narrative shifts. We live in an age where silence is basically extinct. When something big is discovered in archaeology today, it does not stay hidden. Museums take photos, governments run press releases, researchers sprint to publish because being first matters, and mainstream news jumps on anything that has even a hint of ancient treasure. We saw it in 2025 when divers uncovered the lost harbor linked to Cleopatra. Before the sediment was even brushed off the statues, the news cycle had already exploded with photos of colossal heads rising from the water. The pattern is always the same. Institutions announce, experts examine, museums prepare, and the internet spreads it worldwide within hours. Yet, when you shift to the claims about Pharaoh's army resting under the Red Sea, everything collapses into a strange vacuum. Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities has said nothing. Museums have prepared nothing. Journalists have investigated nothing. International archaeologists including the big names who usually jump at underwater discoveries, have not even shrugged in the direction of this story. There is only a storm of YouTube videos generating millions of views, while the institutions responsible for historical truth sit in complete stillness. And that silence becomes the paradox. How can the greatest archaeological find in human history produce zero reaction in an age where reaction is automatic? There are only two possibilities. Either the discovery doesn't exist in the way people think it does, or there is something about institutional behavior that we don't fully understand. And to figure out which is more realistic, we need to break down the three possible truths. The first possibility is the simplest to swallow. The discovery doesn't exist, not in the way YouTube storytellers describe it. This is the one explanation that fits everything cleanly. No institutional response, because there's nothing to respond to. No museum photographs, because there are no artifacts to prepare. No peer review, because there is nothing to review. And when you add the long history of unverified claims connected to this story, from early speculations to Ron Wyatt's controversial diving trips, the pattern becomes clearer. Sometimes extraordinary claims survive because people want the story to be real, not because the evidence forces it to be. The modern YouTube ecosystem rewards big narratives and dramatic thumbnails. Institutions reward accuracy and verification. When those two worlds collide, the louder world often wins the public's attention, even if the quieter world is telling the truth. But there is a second possibility. The discovery might exist, but it is tangled in complications that slow everything down. Maybe the remains are being analyzed in labs. Maybe international agreements are creating delays. Maybe Egypt wants to control the narrative for tourism, branding, or political timing. It's not impossible, but it is unusual. Egypt has proudly announced discoveries much smaller than this. A single statue fragment from the Mediterranean coast can get weeks of coverage. An entire drowned military force from the Book of Exodus would redefine human history. It is hard to imagine any institution sitting on that quietly for a year. The third possibility is the one that lives at the edges of late-night conversations. A global conspiracy that keeps the truth buried. But think about what that would require. Governments, universities, newsrooms, archaeologists, and researchers across dozens of countries would all need to coordinate perfectly with no leaks, no anonymous whistleblowers, and no late-night journalist throwing everything on a blog for clicks. Meanwhile, YouTube creators who aren't even on the expedition would somehow have access to information that all these institutions are perfectly hiding. When you look at how messy real human systems are, that level of silent coordination seems almost impossible. So, the most realistic explanation, according to Occam's razor, is that the discovery doesn't exist in the way it has been presented. Not because people are lying, but because stories evolve faster than facts can keep up with. And that brings us to the deeper question. How do we know what is real in 2025? We basically rely on 4 verification channels: institutional verification, photographic documentation, expert analysis, and credible journalism. When a discovery is real, it leaves footprints in all 4 categories. We saw these footprints in the discoveries along Egypt's coast where statues surfaced from the Mediterranean. We saw them when divers found ancient ports beneath the Red Sea. We saw them when archaeologists mapped lost harbors, temples, and fortifications underwater. Every real discovery leaves a trail of documentation, photography, analysis, and reporting. Pharaoh's army has none of those footprints. Not one official photograph. Not one museum tag. Not one peer-reviewed line of analysis. Not one named researcher is confirming the find. And that absence forces us to separate compelling stories from verifiable facts. The real power of this chapter is not about debunking or defending the claim. It is about giving you the tools to navigate a world where anyone can publish anything, and where the most sensational story often beats the most accurate one. When you learn to evaluate the patterns of verification, you become harder to mislead and a lot harder to impress. You came here wondering if Pharaoh's army was real. But what if the bigger question is even more important? What happens when a story becomes so loud online that people stop asking for evidence at all? And that leads us directly to the next chapter. Because if the silence isn't proof of conspiracy, then what exactly is driving all these modern claims? Why are they spreading so fast right now, more than at any other time in history? The evidence that won't stay buried. For many years, the story of Pharaoh's army that drowned has been mixed in with faith, folklore, and strange science. But now, no matter how many times institutions say the case is closed, the evidence keeps coming up, both literally and metaphorically. And if there's one lesson this entire journey has taught us, it's this. Truth has a strange habit of resurfacing in the very places we've been told not to look. Let's be honest. If thousands of weapons, preserved human remains, and shattered chariots really were resting under the Red Sea, the world should have stopped. Headlines should have screamed. Textbooks should have rewritten themselves. But instead, silence. A few vague mentions, a couple of half-hearted statements, and then a broom sweeping it all under the rug. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The supposed army of the most powerful civilization in ancient history disappears beneath the water 3,400 years ago, and when people finally find them, the evidence disappears again. Only now it's drowned in bureaucracy, skepticism, and academic politics. But here's the twist. The truth can't be buried when too many hands are holding a shovel. Satellite photos quietly leak. Independent divers upload fragments before they're taken down. Archaeologists, anonymous ones, send files, photos, and cryptic messages that all point to the same thing. Somebody down there found something, and that something scared the wrong people. Because once artifacts break the surface, once real objects exist in the real world, no official can simply declare them misidentified coral formations or natural debris. People aren't stupid. A spoked wheel is a spoked wheel. A bronze battle axe is a battle axe. And a fully preserved, salt-locked skeleton wearing what looks terrifyingly like ancient armor? That's not a coincidence, that's a problem. A problem for the institutions built on the idea that these events went and never happened. But maybe the most unsettling part isn't the discovery itself, it's the implications. If this were real, what else have we ignored? What other ancient stories aren't stories at all, but historical accounts waiting for the right diver, the right satellite scan, the right man like Ron Wyatt, or maybe someone even more persistent than him? Whether people believe Ron Wyatt or laugh at him, one fact survives everything. He pointed us to this exact region decades before anyone else dared to take it seriously. Maybe he wasn't right about everything, but he might have been right about more than we ever gave him credit for. So here we are, standing at the end of this story, but at the beginning of a much bigger question. If the remains under the Red Sea are real, and if even a fraction of the claims are true, then this is not a story about religion versus science. It's about history versus the comfortable version of history we've been taught. It's about what happens when evidence refuses to fit inside the approved narrative. And that leaves us with a final question, one only you can answer. If a discovery this massive can be ignored, what else is still hidden beneath the waves? If you enjoyed this journey and want more deep dives into forbidden archaeology, suppressed discoveries, and the mysteries the world isn't ready to explain, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below.